Hello, future Rossies and pre-med explorers. This is Milena Garcia, your host for Ross University Checking the Pulse, a pre-med podcast. This is our mini podcast featuring facts and information about our medical program, insights from current students, and tips from practicing physicians. Each week, this broadcast will be broken down in small episodes, focusing on one aspect of our program, also having guests talk about their own experiences as students and as doctors. Welcome back to our Ross University podcast, everybody. This week, we will cover RUSM and Canada. This episode will be entirely dedicated to the Canadian applicants. We will cover differences in the application process, interviews, campus life for Canadian students, where they go for their clinical rotations, and the differences in applying for the US and the Canadian residency programs. Co-hosting with me this week is our Director of Admissions for Canada and International, Tom Harkness.
Tom, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your taking the time to meet with me.
Thanks, Milena. Great to be here.
Sure. Let's start with you telling us a little bit more about yourself.
So, hi everyone. My name is Tom Harkness. I'm the Director of Admissions for Canadian and International applicants. I do admissions and recruitment across the country, along with my colleague Leah, who does admissions and recruitment in Ontario. I've been with Ross since 2008. My whole career has been in admissions in recruitment. I live in Ontario. I live in a small town called Port Hope, which is about an hour east of Toronto. So if you haven't discovered Port Hope, come and visit us.
Tom, again, you should be careful because you invite me and I show up. It is a lovely town. It's a lovely Canadian town. I won't encourage everybody to go visit you in your home, but it is a lovely town to visit. So I do appreciate you taking your time to meet with me. Tom is a very busy man as Director of Admissions for entire Canada and International. Now, Tom, I think most of our listeners know by now that we are an international school located in Barbados. We follow an equivalent curriculum to the US schools, where our preclinical part of the curriculum is done in Barbados, and then the clinical curriculum is done back here in the US. Our Canadian students are eligible to practice in all Canadian provinces and all 50 US states if they choose to stay here for their residencies. We also have a special website dedicated entirely to the Canadian applicants. So please, everyone, check it out at medical.rosu.edu. Now, Tom, I know that the Canadian student body actually comprises 8% of our student body, and that's approximately also 830 grads for us. So what provinces are the Canadian students coming from?
So the Canadian students are coming from all of the 10 provinces and territories. We recently had a student from the Yukon come in 2 semesters ago, which was great. Of course, Ontario, where I live in, being the most populous province, the vast majority are coming from Ontario. And then we have students coming from British Columbia and Alberta, and then all other provinces. So we have students from all across the country coming in.
And can you talk about the application process for Canadian students? So what's unique to them?
So when the admissions committee looks at a Canadian applicant, with our university system across the country, it's publicly funded. We don't rank our universities like the US does. So it doesn't matter if you went to the University of Victoria in British Columbia, or if you went to Memorial University in Newfoundland and Labrador, you're getting the same quality publicly funded education. So the committee looks at that differently from the US applicants, because they know that Canadian university grading system is much more difficult than what US applicants may receive, depending upon what tiered education they receive. So that's a good thing for you as a Canadian applicant, because they look at your grade and then they say, okay, well, that grade from this Canadian university is probably much higher if we compare it to a US university grade.
And I can speak from personal experiences because we consider a holistic approach to our application process. I called you on many occasions to ask you about the caliber of the school if I happen to have a transcript in front of me, because yes, we are aware that the different schools compare differently. The Canadian schools compare differently when next to a US school.
Right.
How do the Canadian students arrive in Barbados?
So Canadian students can fly directly from Toronto on Air Canada. They fly 365 days of the year. So that flight leaves at 8:10 in the morning. You get in at 1:30, 1:45 into Barbados. It's the first international flight of the day, which is great for you because then you have no problems at customs and immigration. Now, if you're coming from the East Coast or the West Coast, you may have to overnight in Toronto. And then get onto your 8:10 a.m. flight the next day. Some students from the West Coast choose to fly Vancouver to Miami. They then have to overnight in Miami and then fly out on JetBlue or American Airlines the next day to Barbados.
Mm-hmm. And once the students arrive in Barbados, the timeline for the Canadian students is pretty identical to all the other students, meaning they're there in Barbados for the next 4 semesters, and then they come back to the US for the clinical training, that semesters 5 through 10. Now, at RUS, we have several support resources available for all students, such as the Academy for Teaching and Learning, the Counseling Center, Clinical Advisor, Student Services, the Office of Career Attainment. What additional support does RUS have for just the Canadian students?
So the first thing is when you are in orientation week, you need to join the Canadian Student Society. It is a group that has a Facebook page with a lot of alumni, Canadian alumni that are a part of that. It's a great resource for you to ask questions for those alumni. It's also a social group because they celebrate Canada Day on July 1st. They celebrate Thanksgiving in October when it should be celebrated. They also have each semester a day where they prepare poutine, which is a Quebec French fry dish with gravy and curds, which they sell to the American students.
I love poutine.
Yeah, poutine's great. So it's a lot of fun. But also, I go down each semester to meet with the Canadian Student Society along with my colleague Kelly Tesler, who's the Director of Student Services, also Canadian from Ajax, Ontario. And then we're there to support you. And also the Office of Career Attainment. There's a team dedicated to Canadian students that have decided to apply to Canadian residency programs through CARMS. That's led by Elizabeth Severio. And so they will support you and provide you all the documentation that you are required to have in order to submit your applications through CARMS for Canadian residency programs. So there's a lot of support. We're there for you. You can always reach out to me or my colleague Leah with any questions, or Kelly Tesler. Whatever is going on, I follow the Canadian Student Society Facebook page, and I'll answer any questions that you have.
Yeah, you are very involved. And so, after their time in Barbados, the students will come back to the US for their clinical training. As I mentioned before, that's semesters 5 through 10 for a total of 90 weeks. And that's including the Canadian students. How does the work visa work for the students at that time?
So when you enter your 3rd year, we provide you with documentation to enter the US on a B1 visa, which is actually a business visa. But under that business visa, there's a section that it includes medical training. So you fly in or you cross the border, say at Pearson or Vancouver or wherever you're coming from, and you go through US Customs and Immigration, you provide them with the documentation, and then they give you the B1 visa. There are certain points where you may have to renew that visa during your 2 years in the US. But again, we are there to support you with Kelly Tesler and Student Services to provide you with the documentations for renewal.
And what board exams do the students take while in medical school or right after medical school?
So they, of course, the Canadian students take the step 1 and step 2 CKCS. But if you want to apply for Canadian residency programs through CARMS, you have to take 2 Canadian board exams through the Medical Council of Canada. The first one is the Medical Council of Canada Qualifying Exam Part 1. That's the same exam that 4th-year Canadian medical graduates must take in order to start their residency program. And then you must take what's called the NAC-OSCE. It's a clinical skills exam. It's very similar to the step 2 clinical skills exam. The only difference is that in the step 2 clinical skills exam, everybody in the room that's testing you is an actor following a script. In the Canadian exam, everybody's an actor except the doctor. The doctor is an actual Canadian physician, and he or she can go off script if he or she feels that you may know more than the script is allowing in their questions. So you may get peppered with some additional questions. I've talked to some of our Canadian alum about that, and they said it was a bit off-putting at first, but they realized then that the Canadian physician was just trying to help them to, improve their score, because the doctor felt that they knew more than the script was allowing.
I hope they earned brownie points for that.
I hope so too.
Yeah, showing off some additional knowledge. And in fact, the great majority of our students do apply for residency here in US and Canada. In fact, for everyone who's listening, we have 15 years already posted of residency attainments on our website. So do check it out at medical.rusu.edu. We had a 95% match rate last year, so I certainly encourage everybody to look that up. Now, Tom, how do they get back home to practice after passing all these board exams?
So, of course, if they match here at home in Canada, then they just go through the same process as Canadian medical graduates.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're coming out of a US residency program, the easiest pathway home right now is if you do family medicine in the US. It is the fact that every province and territory needs family physicians. So the provinces and territories do not require you to take the Royal College exam. They will set you up with a family physician mentor who will shadow you, kind of follow you for 6 to 8 months, and then write a report to your provincial medical board saying they're good to go, they should receive full licensure, and then you receive full licensure. Under that sort of shadowing observership, you do have sort of a semi-half license, but then once you get full licensure, then you can get hospital responsibilities as well. So that's the easiest pathway home. Here in Ontario, for example, if you did internal medicine in the US is a 3-year program. In Canada, it's a 4-year residency program. So Ontario requires you to take a 4th-year chief residency year, and then you can apply for your license, but you still have to write the Royal College exam.
I think we've shared a lot of information with the listeners at this point. Any last advice or suggestions, recommendations?
It's so difficult to get into Canadian medical school. We have 17 schools across the country, 2 of which are French, and we have very few spots in the medical schools across the country. Some of the schools may have 100, 115 spots. They have 3,000 applicants to those spots, and it can be very difficult. And I suggest that if you don't get in the first time, look at other options, because going on to do a master's does not necessarily improve your chances, because then you go into a different pool of applicants. You're not looked at from applicants that are coming directly out of their undergraduate. You're looking at more mature applicants, and that becomes even more competitive. So if you're passionate about becoming a physician, look at other options abroad. And that option for you is Ross University School of Medicine. Consider this option. And I look forward to speaking with you.
I second that. Don't give up. Having a C in organic chemistry does not mean you can't be a good doctor.
Exactly. Somebody who is an A student versus a B student, and I interview those two applicants, I may look at, recommending that B student, because while they had a B, they did so much to, increase their chances. A lot of volunteering and shadowing.
Grit.
But it affected their grades. Whereas the A student, all they did was study and they got an A, but they have no volunteer community shadowing experiences because they were just focusing on their academics. And I may feel that they're not the right applicant. Maybe the B applicant is better, So do everything you can to improve your chances, and with our holistic approach to the admissions process, don't look down on yourself because you only got a B. When Milena and I interview our applicants, we're looking for that passion, and why you want to become a physician.
All right. Tom, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Milena.
My pleasure. Thank you for being here with us. And for everybody out there, thank you for listening. We appreciate your time as well. And check back for next week's episode.
Thank you for listening to Ross University Checking the Pulse, a pre-med podcast. This is Milena Garcia, your host. This podcast is made for you, so let me know what topics you want us to cover on future episodes. You can send me your comments, feedbacks, and requests to mgarcia@rossu.edu. Definitely follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and our YouTube channel at Ross Med School, or on Facebook. If you're listening to this podcast on iTunes, I am working my way to 5 stars, so remember to send me your comments and let me know your ideas. If you're on Spotify, remember to click on the follow button to get our future episodes. All right, see you future Rossies and Pre-Med Explorers next week.